Welcome to this session today afternoon. It's about bringing the policymakers and the risk modelers together. So we have been hearing all about the risk models, the different technologies throughout the meeting today. And in this particular session, we wanted to bring to fruition the month-long online dialogue between policymakers from governments across the world and some of the technology companies, technology providers which have been working on risk modeling and risk assessment. And the perspective is twofold. We are looking at the sub-regional dimension, not the global, a sub-regional dimension. And then we are going to go down at the city level and look at some of the ways of assessing urban risks. So basically today's session is to introduce what are available as regional risk and urban assessment methodologies. So I just asked Sushil to just show the publications. There have been 5 regional risk assessment reports which have been published. Some of the copies are available here from Central Asia, from Southeast Asia, from Southeastern Europe. These sub-regional risk assessments have been, what we are trying to do in today's session is to look at some of the policymakers from very senior positions from within the government who have used these risk assessments to plan their own national development investment plans and see how they have been able to apply some of these risk assessments to that and what are the challenges in that. So that's really what we are going to do in the first 1 hour. And we'll of course make it very conversational because the presentations are short. It's about 7 to 8 minutes each, and we really hope that we can have some discussions and interventions from the floor. And the aim is to really look at what the gaps which the governments face in applying some of these risk models and how some of the technology providers can step in to fill in these gaps. The second half of this session, the last half hour rather, is about city level risk assessments and trying to see how what we have been seeing even in the session before this about earth observation, about damage assessments, but how does it really relate to the municipal governments, the city governments? Do they really factor this in while planning their urban infrastructure, and what we need to do to help them to do that better? So that's like the last part of this session. So without much ado, I'd like to ask RMSI to introduce the available sub-regional risk assessments which have been worked with the ISDR, the World Bank and GFDRR in some of these regions. So over to you, Sushil, from the RMSI.
Thank you, Prabhu. We have done 4 studies on sub-regional risk assessment. The first one was Central Asia and Caucasus regions. This is the report. Another is on South Asia region. And third is on Southeastern Europe, and fourth one is which is undergoing, that is for the Southeast Asia, that is ASEAN 10 countries. This is a brief agenda of the talk. These are the 4 different regions I had talked. Then type and resolution of available disaster data, loss data in these regions, methodology and resolution and tools, key finding, conclusion, limitations and next steps. So it's a very brief, and I will be just very key conclusions I will be talking about. So this is first area, another is ASEAN, this is Southeastern Europe, and these are the disaster data which has been collected from different sources. For example, for earthquake, like it has been mentioned from 1887 to 2007, because earthquake has a long cycles. Earthquake, tsunamis especially are the long return period events. So data of 20 years is not sufficient for such hazards. For South Asia region, same way. This is a methodology about economic risk assessment. In this, aim is to find out what is the average annual loss and losses for different probability of accidents. So these are the steps, details of the steps, and in this slide these are the flow chart, how these steps are being performed, and the details are also available in this report. Each step is very clearly defined how this has been done. So if you see here, the I would like to say the fourth step, fit a probability curve to determine probability density curve. Usually this is the experience that with a single curve it doesn't fit well. So we used tested several probability distributions, and finally we decided to use 4, 2 parameter log normal, 3 parameter log normal, Gumbel and Pearson type 3, and then depending upon the weight, fitness of good, we give them the weight. This is a very good conclusion about the from the results. So now we can compare how a 200-year return period event of 0.5 probability of accidents, how it impact the country GDP. So we can have a comparison in the region. This comparison has been done for even sub-region level also, like in Central Asia, Caucasus and Central Asia, there are the 2 sub-regions. So you can see if I compare with Tajikistan and Kyrgyzstan, a same event of 200-year return period, it will cause 20% of GDP for Tajikistan, while it will be 4.6% of GDP for the Kyrgyzstan. Next, similar way for South Asia region, like we can compare now India versus Bangladesh versus Nepal, how it will impact. For India, it will be say 1.2% of the GDP, but if you see Nepal, it will be 9% of country GDP. So these conclusions also sinks well that smaller countries are more vulnerable in developing countries which are small in size. They are much more vulnerable. Even a one single catastrophic event can wipe out its all development. These are the various risk assessment methodologies. Like one, we can do a very quick and fast one, like this one we have pulled up. And another way is like you develop the whole exposure data and then you go to the end to the risk assessment. So there are different ways of doing this. Now I will call my colleague Indrajit Klere. He will speak on this slide.
Thanks, Sushil. As we saw on the previous slide, there are different levels of assessment that can be done. What we have done right now is on the top left, which is a desktop review and a literature review of what is currently available in these regions, in these countries, going all the way to detailed exposure and vulnerability calculations to come up with the risk. A lot of this is dependent on the availability of historical data, good data. There are international catalogs as well as national catalogs, but again, the quality and the extent and how far back in time they go is a function of each country's history and capability and capacity within the country. But we also find, as Sushila just mentioned, that smaller countries are more vulnerable, and a single event, a major event, can actually skew the results considerably. When we did the Southeastern Europe study, one big earthquake is actually contributing something like 60-70% of the total results in there. So that is a limitation on this. Also, these are fairly rare events, so we don't have enough reference points from there. We haven't yet calculated the exposure. The previous session was talking about how to actually get exposure data. We don't have exposure data for these countries, so it's not really based on that. Events like drought, which are fairly major concerns in Central Asia as well as in Southeastern Europe, are slow gestation, long-term events. We don't really have what is the start date and cutoff date, so modeling of that is slightly different from this. The studies that have been done so far are not really suitable for coming up with adaptation and mitigation measures, though they give pointers towards that. So what we are actually looking at is what are the next steps? Where can we take these forward and actually benefit from doing a more detailed study? There are 3 levels that we've looked at. One is a similar level but at a higher resolution. So instead of doing just a regional level for each country, we want to do this. We can actually look at worst case scenarios for the population centers, the major cities which are most vulnerable in terms of loss of life and damage. And level 3 is actually fully probabilistic models for country and region that need to be developed from this. Some of the recommendations that we made in the reports, and Sushil said the reports are available, you could have a look through them, is one, the natural hazards actually don't respect national boundaries, so we need to look at regional cooperation. We saw that the same event can have seriously different impacts on neighboring countries. So we need to actually have coordination within the country as well as across the region. We need to have a centralized database of past events and also an inventory of exposure and other data. And we need to be strengthening the institutional capacity, and I think a lot of the gentlemen on the panel and the lady are going to be talking about that to a further extent. And we also want to do, as I said, more detailed risk assessment, come up with plans which incorporate that. Looking at poverty elevation, we've heard in several sessions starting from yesterday evening that the poor are most vulnerable, and how do we make sure that they are also included in this. And so there's a lot of these steps. I'm going to hand over back to Praveen and the rest of the panel to actually have this discussion on how we can take this forward and really use it to come up with actual recommendations and steps that need to be implemented.
So, thank you, Claire. So really the issue is that if we know so much about risk, and many of the methods by which we can reduce risk are well known in countries, then why do countries still get caught off guard when major disasters hit them? So what does it take from a risk assessment to convert it into a political action of ex-ante investments? Not after the fact. After the fact, there are $1 billion being invested every day after a major disaster. Before the disaster, to actually reduce, retrofit, and take action. So basically, now we have 4 very senior decision makers from different parts of the world. I'm going to ask Mr. Larensky, Mr. Pandey, who is the national coordinator of the government of Macedonia. He's both a professor but now a politician. So it's very important to know whether he's playing his political role well enough. Is he able to convince his government to put money here, or whether he's still just on the theoretical front? Over to you, Mr. Pandey.
Well, probably I have to speak on the microphone, yeah? Well, it is a nightmare for politicians to have a university professor among them in their circle, and vice versa. It is a nightmare for professors to be together with politicians. And if you don't believe me, please ask Professor Yolevsky. He is in the first row here, my good friend from the academia, from university, but also an ambassador of Macedonia to the United States. Is it true? Yes, of course. Yeah. And now?
Yeah, which one is yours?
The one that you pointed right now.
This one?
Yeah.
Okay. So it's
Okay. So, distinguished colleagues and friends, I will try to keep your attention on the link between risk assessment and development and design of the national platform for disaster risk reduction and all activities along with that. First of all, I want to emphasize that in 2007, Macedonia experienced extremely severe wildfires, very similar like in other European countries. And at the end of the year, it was a report prepared by UNDP referring to the HEOGO and to the concept of national platforms. In addition to that, in 2008, you could see here, UNISDR and World Bank issued a risk assessment desk review for Southeast Europe that literally triggered a high-level political interest, and not only just a political interest, but also triggered a review of the existing risk assessment methodologies in the countries, hopefully in other countries as well. Why? Because if you have a lousy methodology, risk assessment methodology, you could imagine what's going to be the quality of the very risk assessment and how things will move further. So I want to keep a little bit your attention on a couple of triangles. So the first one is methodologies, assessments, and planning. The other is methodology, insurance, and investments. And something that is underneath all of this is planning and organizational structure and decision-making process. I will not stick with this rather complicated scheme, how everything is organized. But if you want to establish the sound and the working system, it is necessary to have a good organizational scheme and to be clear who is doing what, when, and how. Actually, to have quite a clear cut how things are running and who is responsible for whom, who is responding to whom, and finally how the loop of responsibility is closed. So just very briefly, at the top now we have a national coordinator that is immediately under the Prime Minister in the government. with the global authorities about all aspects of risk, how to say, of planning and executing different aspects related to a variety of problems that might occur. And here is the other governmental bodies. So not to keep story long, this is just a snapshot how complex is the whole scheme, but with very clean line of communication. Not to have overlapping, because once you have overlapping, nothing will work. So here we have networking on the national and local levels, and again, politicians, administration, but also with academia, with NGO sector, with the business community. So everything is part of this major endeavor. On this side, you have 7 different platforms that are related to different kinds of problems. So establishing of this scheme was somehow prerequisite to have a sound approach to the other problems, to the other triangles that I mentioned, methodologies, assessment, and planning, and also methodologies, insurance, and investment. So now I will keep your attention a little bit more how methodologies were developed, but much more on that, what methodologies are consisted of. Because I started with the thesis that if you don't have a sound methodology, everything will look great, but at the end of the day, it's going to be a nightmare. Because nothing will be reliable, and everybody that will take some steps, the steps will be like shooting from a hip. Maybe you will aim, maybe not. Most probably not. So last year we launched the international call for development of methodologies. Believe it or not, it was disaster per se, because none institution was ready to cope with such a complex thing. So we said, okay, we're going with another step, and we launched another international call, how to develop the guidelines for development of methodology for assessment of risks and hazards. And that was successful, and European Center on Vulnerability of Industrial and Life Systems did job perfectly, and out of their profound job, now we have 3 documents that are sound base to continue with development of 3 types of methodologies. Risk assessment and consequence methodologies, risk mapping methodologies, and risk monitoring methodology. What the difference are in between. So, I will walk. That's the typical for professors. First, it is not a problem only related to occurrence of phenomena implying risk. It's clear, if we have an earthquake, it's going to be earthquake. But the victims are coming because of the other things. So we emphasize the other occasions that turn things into disaster. For instance, community resilience and vulnerability, competent institutions' capacity assessment. How institutions are able to cope with the situation. If they're not able, you're leaning to their capacity. Capacity does not exist. And finally, at the end of the day, you will be just in a sort of confusion. Whom you're going to go to ask for support? You're going to save the people, the institutions, or what's going to happen? Finally, there are another kind of methodology related to escalation, response, and financial implication assessments. So this is a rather complex set of different methodologies that are in a sort of interplay among them. The other thing is risk mapping methodologies, methodology determining the location where things is happening, determining the circumstances leading to phenomena implying risk, or responding to the question how, and methodology for determining the expected intensity, how much. Because depending on the combination of this, you are planning the deployment of resources in any particular situation. And finally, risk monitoring methodology for monitoring the critical factors that imply both individually and in combination a risk pertaining to the occurrence of disaster. And now on this big scheme that is much more simplified for this occasion. I want to point the line between methodologies, assessments and scenarios, plans, and procedures. So the three kinds of methodologies that I mentioned before, depending heavily on the sophisticated IT technologies and scientific procedures, are prerequisite to have a risk and threat assessment related to any of the risks that might threat communities. Based on this, we're going to scenarios on possible transition of risk into accidents and disaster. This morning in the another group, it was excellent discussion on the modeling process that scenario making, scenario development is very much related to. And based on scenarios, there are prefabricated plans for preparedness, prevention, and operations that, adjusted through the rapid assessment methodology tools, provide adjusted operation plans that, together with SOPs for different circumstances, are solid base to launch appropriate action. And finally, here we have another situation. In addition to everything that I mentioned so far, okay, 1 minute, I'm going to be finished. This is the last slide. There are a separate escalation assessment methodology. We establish escalation scale from green to red. Green means situation normal. 911 is functioning as usual, that's it. But if the usually needed resources are not enough on the local level and needs deployment of more local sources, then it is level green. Yellow. If municipality is not able to cope with the problem, needs help from the other surrounding municipalities, from the region, or to use American terminology, from the county, then it is situation orange. And finally, if it is a national emergency, we are jumping to the national level emergency or crisis situation that, according to the law, is declared by the government. And finally, for each of these levels, there are from this scale, there are 5 levels depicting severity of the problem, starting with no risk, that is in conjunction with situation normal, and the other you're recognizing from the Homeland Security model, risk level low, elevated high, up to the level critical. And again, just to wrap up the whole story, this is possible to be done in this way if you have a sound methodologies. Why? Because it needs clear procedures, it needs a clear contextual line, what is going, in what kind of circumstances, clear variables, and finally indicators that are clearly recognizable and provide activation of the appropriate procedures for each of these levels. That was more or less the story for the beginning. And I think that definitely this is applicable not only in one country, but generally this approach is quite applicable. And now the question, what is the problem not to have a joint approach? Because with all due respect to the circumstances in different countries, finally we're facing the same problems, and it is necessary to have a sort of interoperability with the neighboring countries, with international organizations, to recognize each other from the functional standpoint and to know to whom to refer regarding the specific type of the problems. So the question to you, my dear colleagues, is how we could provide the unified platform that will provide, how to say, interoperability on a large scale. Thank you very much for your attention.
So I'll thank you for that detailed presentation. We are going to move over to the African Union, where the whole African Union, how it's looking at the entire continent in relation to risk assessment and what are the data challenges that they face. To Madam Sodeko, Olushula, and yeah, you have the floor. Madam Olushula is in charge of the African Union's disaster risk reduction program, and is based in Ethiopia, Addis.
Thank you. Your Excellencies, because I can see there are many professors who have become politicians here. Your Excellencies, distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen, our presentation today is going to focus on two main aspects. First, the topic is regional risk assessments as a tool for national investment planning in Africa. And as I said, it's going to focus on two major aspects. The two questions are, what have countries and regions, how have we been able to use the risk assessment in national investment planning in the countries in Africa and in the region? And the second aspect is going to deal with how the new technologies can support our efforts. So first is that risk assessment is considered in the program of action for the implementation of the African Regional Strategy on Disaster Risk Reduction. This program of action was approved by the heads of state of Africa in 2005, and the overall goal is to reduce the social, economic, and environmental impact of disasters on African people and economies, thereby facilitating the achievement of the MDGs and other development processes in Africa. There are 6 strategic areas, intervention areas, but the key ones that relate to this, and I'm going to focus on, is the improved identification and assessment of disaster risk. Now, in the African Union, we have 8 regional economic communities, which these are the building blocks of the African Union, and for the risk assessments are embedded in the policies and the strategies of the different regional economic communities. And with the support of the UNISDR and the World Bank DRR, we have been able to support just a few of, well, it's about 6, because we, as I said, we have 8, but I will just mention because of our time. The IGAD, which is the for the Eastern African region, we have been able to develop and approve the disaster risk strategy in 2004, and the ECOWAS, which is for the Western African region, Western African states, we have developed and approved a common policy, which is a mechanism for disaster risk reduction, and this was approved in 2007. And for the SADC region, which is the Southern African states, with the policy has been established and has shifted focus from area of security and is now focusing more on disaster risk reduction. And in their own case, they have been able to even create a disaster risk reduction unit. And then also we are supporting the ECAS, which is for the Central African states. There's Indian Ocean and also the East and the Eastern African communities. Now, in Africa, many countries have considered risk assessment as a key pillar for disaster risk reduction strategy in their plans, and is really embedded in the program of action. And in April, just this April 2010, at the second African Ministerial Conference on disaster risk reduction, member states had a declaration, and the declaration included that all member states are to have institutional and legal frameworks on disaster risk reduction and to allocate resources for disaster risk reduction, and it's on 2 levels. First is that development and humanitarian partners should disburse 1% of their development funds to disaster risk reduction, and the second aspect is that 10% of the humanitarian assistance should support disaster risk reduction in the area of preparedness and recovery. Now, the status right now is that we have been able to, you have just seen from the last presentation about national platforms. In Africa, out of the 53 countries, we have about 25 countries have established national platforms. And these national platforms have been able to use risk assessment on, based on hazards and doing their vulnerability assessment, and also they have been able to put up systems to monitor, archive, and disseminate data and disaster risk data. I hope I'm still within my time, because now I'm going to address the second question. That is how the new technologies like Google Earth, NASA, and so on can support the disaster risk reduction. And I've just listed about 6 activities there, but I will just focus on about just 4 because of our time. And the first one is on the improvement of quality of information and data on disaster risk. And the second one I'm going to look at is on the area of support of the regional and international cooperation to assess and monitor regional and transboundary hazards, as you have heard from the first presenter, that hazards don't have limit. There's no transboundary limit. And then the fourth one, which I'm going to highlight, is just on the area of development of frameworks for action to reduce urban multidimensional vulnerability with impact and different types of urban risks, including climate change. And now, how? When you have seen these activities, then how can they support? I've just mentioned 3 key areas because of our time. First is to raise awareness on the availability and the types of products available, and then the second one is to have technical cooperation both at the regional, at the sub-regional, and the national levels. While the third is to support disaster risk organizations with data and training, capacity building, and research funding. Now, we'll be glad. Lastly, we'll be glad to hear from you on how we can further support, how you can further support Africa in your various technologies. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Olushula. That was a really very good overview of what are the challenges in the African Union. We come to the last presentation of this particular panel. It's from India, Mr. Anil Prasad. He's the Secretary for the National Disaster Management Authority of India. And what we are really going to request of him is to move from the planning stage, because we have heard how the plans can be laid out, in terms of some of the actual implementation, where risk assessment and implementation of ex-ante mitigation projects are there. So over to you, Mr. Prasad.
Good afternoon, friends. I wanted to speak on many things, but they seem to have been covered by my friends who have already spoken before me. In the beginning, I must emphasize that India has a very well-established and robust governance structure. And during the last 15, 20 years, it has taken a large number of steps in integrating disaster risk reduction concerns and risk analysis into its functioning, both at the policy level as well as at the implementation level. I am Secretary of an organization, NDMA, National Disaster Management Authority, which is the principal agency in charge for managing emergencies, both at the post-incident level and also before the incident occurs, preparation, mitigation, and preparedness. In fact, though in India, these concerns were to some extent attended to in the early 50s and 60s in form of river valley projects, which were designed for flood problems. And but around 1995, we began the march towards integrating this disaster risk reduction concerns and risk analysis into our actual development planning and investment planning. Sorry. This is the disaster profile of the country. Of course, flood is the major problem, covering about more than 50% of the problems on this front. Then cyclone and earthquakes, they are the next most serious problems of the country. And the overall reach of these problems, you can see on this slide. This indicates all the 3 problems we have: floods, cyclones, and earthquakes. Then this slide gives you some idea of the economic losses that the country suffered during the last 40 years on account of these incidents. As I told you, in 50s and 60s, the country did something, but the major emphasis was on tackling floods. But around 10th 5-year plan, India works through a 5-year planning process, and we design our plans every 5 years. So 10th 5-year plan, which began in 2002 and covered the periods till 2007, criticality of DRR was recognized on a large basis, and risk analysis and DR concerns got a prominent place in the entire planning process. So this is what we have. So the plan document of India introduced a compulsive process of this analysis and objective risk assessment in the country's planning process. But a major landmark was the initiation of the 11th five-year plan, which runs from 2007-2012. It recognized that DRR and risk analysis, they have to be made a compulsory process in the investment policy of the government. All these schemes and projects which were sanctioned, they were supposed to be cleared from this angle, and every department is now mandated to certify that all these concerns have been met in any new project which they begin. So this is the milestone. Cyclones, they affect about 13 states of the country, covering 84 coastal districts. We have a system of having our states divided into districts. Even these are very large formations. Average population of a district would be about 2 to 3 millions. So this is the problem which affects about 84 coastal districts of the country. And the country has done a lot during last 15 years in erecting systems looking after early warning, automatic weather stations, rain gauges and Doppler radars. And of course there has been a tremendous growth in the communication facilities all across the country. Then next is floods. Floods affect around 12 to 13% of the total geographical area of the country, and they are a very regular feature in the eastern part of the country, covering 3-4 major states like Bihar, West Bengal. So that has been a very major concern of the government. And as I told you earlier, in 50s, 60s, when the government started on these programs, flood was their primary concern. So river valley projects and even one Damodar Valley Corporation was formed in Bihar on the pattern of TVA. So that was the earliest system. But now we have taken these measures in the country. Then next is earthquake. Our 55-56% of our country's area is sensitive to earthquakes. And they would cover 22 states and about 239 districts out of 630 districts of the country. They would cover 239 districts. And our whole Himalayan region, that is a very sensitive area, and serious earthquake of magnitude more than 7-8, I mean, they are a real possibility in that region. In this context, we have done some kind of probabilistic seismic hazard analysis and microzonation, and there have been also many of the states have amended their techno-legal regimes. Then we are working on construction of earthquake-resistant houses and infrastructure. Then we have several agencies, important agencies of the country, like Indian Institute of Science, Bangalore, Structural Engineering Research Center, Chennai, Meteorological Department of India, National Spatial Data Infrastructure, and other institutions which support activities in this field. And now NDMA is trying to have a very comprehensive database on earthquake issues, and maybe by next year it should be ready. Then we have taken some more steps in actually making these steps happen. We have our portals at state and district levels. They are functional portals. And there's one organization called Building Material Technology Promotion Council, which had published the first vulnerability atlas of the country in 1997-98. I mean, that is being updated now. So we'll have a latest version in next 2 years' time. Then NDMA, my organization, National Disaster Management Authority, which is the coordinating body for all these organizations as far as these activities are concerned, this is now preparing an updated risk atlas. Then, of course, as far as making use of technology is concerned, Gujarat state immediately after Bhuj earthquake, they had used the shuttle radar topographic mission map of NASA for the risk atlas, and that was done in 2001 after the earthquake. And then Department of Ocean Development has used this wind simulation model for preparing inundation map of the coastal areas. That was done after 2004 tsunami. These are the two applications of the technologies which we have done, making use of these models. And then, of course, NDM as a coordinating body is trying to coordinate all these projects and trying to make these maps and models available within a time span of next 2 years or so. Now coming to issue of regional cooperation, of course, as my friend told, many of the hazards don't respect any boundary, and the entire subcontinent of comprising of India, Pakistan, Bangladesh and Afghanistan, they are sensitive to common issues. Like we have issues of glacial lake outburst, cyclones, floods and drought of 2000, which affected India, Pakistan and Afghanistan almost on a similar scale. So there we can have and we should have cooperation, because though maybe we can't prevent the onslaught of this disaster, but of course post-incident management could have commonalities, and maybe resources of one country could be used to help others in that region. And India, being a large one, has a special responsibility, because we can of course help other countries in tackling many of these situations. And then we have other initiative is with respect to SARS. We have a SARS disaster center in New Delhi, and this is also ASEAN standby arrangement for disaster relief and emergency response created in the ASEAN agreement. So these are the regional initiatives taken in India. And one issue which I would like to describe here, that India being a vast country, it has 28 states, provinces and 7 union territories. It also has problems of coordination among its own provinces and states that may be in magnitude, they may be at times quite difficult. So we have taken initiatives. We have a very large river Ganga, and it covers 3 states. So that there was a Ganga Flood Control Commission formed in 1972 that could take care of interstate issues. Then we had in 1950s Damodar Valley Corporation that was taking care of floods in part of Bihar and West Bengal in 1950s. So these 2-3 initiatives are there even for coordination among the states. Then of course there are some issues which may demand dialogue with technology providers at all levels. One is there needs to be an institutionalized knowledge network in the country. But no, next 2 minutes. Okay, then these are the areas. Yeah. So this is knowledge sharing and networking. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for your presentation. I would like to open up the floor now for any feedback, any questions to the panelists. And there are also some written requests for interventions, but which I will go in a bit later. If there are any other questions from the audience to the panel. Yes. Yes, please. You have to go to the mic to speak so it can be recorded.
Hello. This is a question for the India presentation, the last one. And this is regarding on, you mentioned that India has integrated risk assessment in the programming and the planning of the public sector and the operation of the planning sector. I wonder if in you have developed in the country a risk assessment instrument or guideline for ex-ante evaluation of public investment projects? That's one question. And the other one would be kind of related to that. When you showed your risk profile for your country, most of the profile has to do with water-related natural hazards, 80% or maybe 90% of it. So in that regard too, and related to the first question, I was wondering if this profile has translated into better prepared water and sanitation sector or provider to cope with risk events of such nature. That's it.
Are there any other issues? Okay, Mr. Otino. We'll collect 3 questions and then ask the panelists.
Maybe to the professor. You talked of a risk assessment methodology, mapping methodology, and monitoring methodology. And you also talked of the different players, the platform members that are into play. My question is, in terms of coordination, especially who wants to do what first, given that these different players, they have different values, they have different beliefs, and they have different mandates. So who authenticates this kind of report? Thank you.
Is there anything else? Yes.
Yes, my questions to the last speaker. Just I want to know, because India is just like a big continent, compared with the Sri Lanka. Then because just you talk about the development planning and the so many local government within the your at least in the state, how you are going to connect with the grassroots level, especially the local government level. Now I saw you have the different type of policies and the programs, and how you are going to connect with the local government, especially the development planning. That is why I want to know.
Thank you. So we will have 2 minutes interventions in response. I think first we can go to Mr. Pandey, and then you have to respond to 2 questions. So we can
Get back to the slide just to be much more clear. Could you help me? Don't count. Okay. And up. Okay. About the very question that you ask, who is in charge for what? This level, national coordinator, is the authorized to make overall coordination of all national level activities, all ministers, agencies, directors, etc., etc. So he is in charge to make the overall coordination, respond directly to the government, to the Prime Minister. Steering committee consisted of the parliamentary representative, national security advisor to the President, all ministers, and representatives of local authorities. This is the steering body, political body. From this side, we are going to the administration level. Council of State Secretary. State Secretary is the highest administrative position in each of the ministry. And the Secretary General of the government is running this council. And you see the separate working groups on different aspects, not on different kind of risks, on different aspects. Normal legal harmonization, finance, human resources, info networking, standardization, etc., etc. So on this side, the coordination in a functional way. Here we have Inspectoral Council. Minister of Justice is headed, and we have a 21 separate inspectorate as state agencies directors are here. Why? To make a solid coordination and to adjust their acts. Local and regional authorities. There are no regional authorities. They're like a coordination of municipalities. They're again in this big picture. Directly to your question, methodologies will be developed in each of 7 different platforms. Each of the platforms is related to specific kind of risk. For instance, infrastructure, health, hazmat, environmental risk, industrial hazard, agriculture, forestry, water management, risks related to material cultural heritage. For each of these, there are different kinds of methodologies developed. Because when we are talking about health-related risk, there are not only one kind of risks. One is epidemics, but there are many other things. If we are talking about, environmental risk, again, there are a full spectrum of different kinds of risk. And for each of them will be developed a separate set of methodologies that will be interlinked, related to that kind of threat. So once again, this is the political level, administrative level, and expert level.
Thank you. We have Mr. Anil Prasad for the other 2 questions.
One question is about how do we integrate risk assessment into our planning process. We do have a atlas of slightly, maybe it is a continuous process, but we do have a vulnerability atlas for floods, earthquakes, and cyclones. So whatever is the threat, that has to be incorporated in the specific plan, and whenever it goes to a ministry for final clearance, those issues are discussed. The department concerned with those disasters, that will pass its comment, and then only that scheme or project would be clear. The second issue is coming to floods. Most of the problems that India has in the eastern side is because of rivers emanating in Nepal. So it again becomes an issue of coordination between the 2 countries. And Nepal being a small country, it has not been able to muster enough resources to control these rivers. So this is one issue, but there has been a continuous dialogue between the 2 countries. Maybe something will emerge next couple of years. And about your water and sanitation problem, this is a slightly different one, because you may be having plenty of water in the states. Still, during the lean season, you'll have problems of water and sanitation. Probably my friend, somebody else is speaking on that, no? No.
At the city level,
at the city level. So that problem is slightly of different dimension. And one more question. And then second was about, she was asking how do we link with the local governance structures. To clarify that, I must say that India has a very well-defined local government structures. We have a structure at the district level. Then below that at the block level, subunit of a district, you have an elected representative body there. And then also at the village level, all the 3 tiers are functional of the country. And whenever a scheme is initiated or contemplated, now clearance and views of those tiers of PRIs, we call it Panchayati Raj institutions, that is mandatory. So it has to be cleared from these bodies, then only you can make an integrated plan. So that way we take care of the local interest. Thank you.
Thank you. We have 2 written requests, one from Mr. Viktor Boldansko from the Russian Geological Research Institute to make an intervention, and then also have it.
I'm Viktor Snishko. I'm a geologist from Russia, St. Petersburg, Russian Research Geological Institute. I will be brief. In our opinion, the correct assessment of geological hazard is one of the most important conditions of risk assessment. But when we try to make assessment of geological hazard of any territory, we face three main problems. First, how to convert geological properties of a dangerous geological process to the gradation of geological hazard. Second, how to get complex geohazard assessment of territory. For example, how can we compare and some seismical and erosion hazard? Third, how to make this assessment clear not only for geologists but for regular people, management and governments. The method which help us to solve these problems has been developed in our institute. The core of this method is specific features of dangerous geological processes, for example, peak ground acceleration, amplitude of ground shaking, residual ground deformation for earthquake, and speed of erosion, annual speed of sediment fluxes, vertical deformation, deep location indicator for erosion, etc. for any processes can be converted to universal index, degree of geohazard for human life and infrastructure. This index, degree of geohazard, for single process can be measured in points, and we use 5 levels for this index. Based on the above, any dangerous geological process for any territory can be measured in points of degree of geohazard, and we can integrate points of degree of geohazard for each level. And we can get complex assessment of geohazard for any territory. This is a total index of geohazard. We also use 5 levels for this index, like for single process. This method allows us to use GIC to create database and spatial assessment of complex geological hazards. You can see on the screen the fragment of map of geohazard for North Caucasus.
I think
2 minutes. Can I speak 2 minutes?
We are through with the time. So maybe if we have some more feedback questions, then we can come back again. You want to just conclude?
Sorry. Заканчиваю, да? Ну все, 2 minutes. Similar map and method was also used for assessment hazard of accident on main Gazprom gas pipeline of Europe part of Russia. The results were highly appreciated by Gazprom experts. Now we started our research for East Siberia region. The future map will be used to evaluate risk and financial investment to select the optimal pipeline route. Thanks.
Thank you. Are there any other interventions from Kyrgyzstan? Would you like to make your intervention now or towards the end? Okay, let's go ahead.
You mean, okay. I would like to give some brief information about Kyrgyzstan and Central Asian experience and disaster risk assessment. This is quite new for our region, and okay. And the central first is the regional cooperation in Central Asia is now quite weak. We have 5 countries, for example, it's Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Turkmenistan, Tajikistan, and Uzbekistan, very densely populated areas, and we have almost all kinds of hazards. And regarding Kyrgyzstan, I can say that all natural hazards are well identified and mapped at national level. And disaster risk assessment is not developed in Kyrgyzstan well, and the country has very limited financial and administration resources.
and the law awareness and engagement at the highest national political level, and the low level of insurance, disaster insurance, it is lower than 1%. The natural disaster loss annual costs about $35 million, and the state budget allocated for disaster risk, disaster management and prevention is about $6 million a year. And there are international and regional cooperations supported by the different international projects, as, for example, Central Asian, Caucasus Disaster Risk Management Initiative, and also we have supported projects by DPECO program of European Commission, and the ongoing strengthening of national regional cooperation promoted and supported by UNISDR in line with HFA Priority 2. And this I would like to say.
Thank you. I think, is that all?
Yes.
Thank you. Yes. So basically we have come to the end of our panel, and we have been talking about what we look at in terms of the regional risk assessments and what impact it has had on some of the national governments. We looked at from Macedonia, from the African Union, and also from India, and a few examples from Russia and Kyrgyzstan. I think we would like to now go down, drill deeper from the national to the very local, subnational level, and look at how really risk assessments work in planning urban infrastructure, because that's where infrastructure planning comes into being. I'm going to request two panelists. These are going to be two short presentations. One from Eric from the World Bank on the overall methodology, and also from Pune, an example from an application from a city in India. So Eric, first.
Right, well, first and foremost, thank you very much to Praveen and Dave, who's not here, for the invitation to speak today. It's a real honor to share the room with distinguished colleagues. My name is Eric Dixon. I work in the Urban Anchor as an urban economist. And over the past several months, about 8 months, we've been working to develop a simple, flexible, cost-effective tool that can be used at the city level to understand urban risk. And of course, the question generally that we get is, how much does it cost? And the trick that we're trying to solve is, what is a consistent way that any city with any budget and any institutional capacity could begin to understand their risk? What we know, and we all have recognized, is that there's increasing demands on city governments in today's day and age. With populations that are burgeoning, they have pressure to increase services, they have pressure to alleviate poverty within urban areas, but increasingly what we're seeing now is the influence, the impact of disaster is affecting urban areas more and more. Coupled with that is climate change. So now we've got 3 different priority areas that city governments are being asked to address, and frankly, where they choose to put their money is open to debate and question. What we see increasingly here in the bank and also outside is a huge need for coordination. What we know is that governments at the national level and at the city level are increasingly moving from reaction to proaction, to being proactive about their investments. For their development agencies, such as the World Bank, this is increasingly important, and also it has implications on our own urban investments and, of course, for city governments as well. But the result of these 3 points is that there is currently a proliferation of city and hazard-specific vulnerability assessments. Now, this is neither bad nor good, but there's not a lot of coordination. A very quick snapshot, and I promise you I will not go through all of these, but this is just a picture of all the activities just in the World Bank alone that are related to urban risk. So what you can see is that as an institution, we have to make steps towards coordinating our own activities and our own way of measuring risk and understanding risk. So what we need, as I said, is something that's simple to understand, that can build consistently from a baseline of data requirements and get increasingly complex and increasingly resource heavy in terms of the information that's required, the institutional capacity that's required, and the technological developments that are required. But importantly, we recognize that there has been a lot of thinking that has gone into this area, and we're not trying to recreate the circle, but rather, or recreate the wheel, but rather to pull different pieces of information that have already been done into something that's packaged coherently. So a point in case is a colleague earlier from Macedonia mentioned the importance of institutions, and that's absolutely critical. So our colleagues from the East Asia region recently launched the Climate Resilient Cities Primer. It's very strong on a simple set of questions to rapidly understand the institutional capacity of a city. So we use this as our basis. Equally, the International Development Research Center, based out of Ottawa, Canada, has put forward the methodological guide for the construction of integrated system for environmental management. In this, they put forward 4 different data sets that they believe to be quintessential to understanding urban risk. Of course, under each of these 4 components are subcomponents of indicators, of data that should be collected. We are also very cognizant of the fact that satellites, the use of remote sensing is growing in importance in international development, and we want to harness this. What we know is that in urban areas, you need a resolution of 0.5 to 1.5 meters by and large. 1.5 to 5 can be useful for certain distinction of buildings or of construction types, but really where we're aiming to get is the 0.6 meters up to 1 meters. Now, of course, there are cost implications of this, and we are looking at, as our colleague from Africa mentioned, the ways of using Google Earth so that federations of the poor could use that free technology, can map their slums, can take the information that they have gathered from household surveys and tag that. So we're trying to, again, to bring these together in a cost-effective way. So, of course, here's a picture of Goma, DRC, taken from the GOI satellite, and you can see the amount of resolution that you can get at 0.6 centimeters, 0.6 meters of resolution. But a word of caution, of course, is that satellite use of satellites and remote sensing is not a panacea. There are benefits. There are also drawbacks, without going through too much of the technicalities, if you look at the images below, these are the same location taken with different sensors at different times. And specifically, I'll draw your attention to the bottom right, where the same location can be viewed quite clearly, and then progressively worse depending on cloud cover, time of day, season. But as I mentioned, the role of communities is central, and we do not for a moment believe that the only way to collect information is from the sky. Indeed, groups like Slum Dwellers International have proven that information collected on the ground can be of the most value. And of course there are pros and there are cons. There's huge accuracy in doing house-to-house surveys. The spatial resolution is beyond anything a satellite could provide, but of course it takes time. There's issues of capacity and issues of resources. So we are looking at ways to overcome these challenges, such as I just mentioned, the use of Google Earth, or through purchase of satellite imaging at group block rates. An interesting example that I came across was from the International Space University, which I'd never heard of until reading this document and learned that they'd developed an iPhone prototype where someone could walk around a slum. Now, recognizing iPhones may not be too prevalent in slums, but take information on the location of a structure, the number of floors, the building type, the material that's been used. That can then be uploaded into these new open source technologies that we're hearing about at this conference, OpenStreetMap, Crisis Commons. So coming back to my original pyramid, as it were, what we're proposing is a simple process whereby there's assessments at the institutional level of hazard, both from climate change in terms of slow onset, but also rapid onset, both historical and forward-looking, and the social assessment that I just referred to, with the role of communities very much front and center in that. And within each of these primary, secondary, and tertiary levels are steps that a city could take should they have the capacity and the resources to do so. And what we expect to find is that we may approach a city who is more interested in doing a primary level risk assessment, and they will inform us very readily that their historical hazard assessment is complete and their data sets are ready. They may be more interested in perhaps in addressing issues of institutional mapping and understanding the resource flows from national levels to city levels. So this is a snapshot of the different approaches that we're advocating. This is a tool that is a methodology that is under development. We are working towards piloting this, and that's all, as concise as I can be. Thank you.
Thank you, Eric, for setting this framework. This is excellent. And we looked at a tool now, and we're just going to end with a practical application of how this sort of a risk assessment actually translates. Does it really translate into a city government taking steps to change its infrastructure to match the risk assessment need? This is an example from Ajit Oak from the city of Pune in India, Western India.
First one. Can we make it short on this? Okay. It's all right. Okay. You sure? Yeah. Can I have the pointer? Yeah. Thank you. Good afternoon. I'm going to talk about a project that was done over the last 2-3 years in the city of Pune in India. This is sort of a case study, can be used as a tool for urban flood risk investment planning. So this is actually looking at stormwater and flood risks, and it is a project that also looked at what kind of investments are required to overcome the risk. So I'll quickly go through the overall project that was done, and then we can take some questions at the end. Okay, the city of Pune, I come from the city of Pune, and I've seen it grow. This is a very typical city of, developing countries which are getting industrialized very fast. So from a small, laid back town in the 70s, it's now a big city of almost 3.5 million at this stage, and likely to grow double its size in the next 20 or 30 odd years. It covers an area of approximately 250 square kilometers, another 100 square kilometers of fringe areas, which is more or less an urban settlement now. So pressure on land is very high. Pressure on resources is very high, and I have to say this because if we have to look at disaster risks and trying to make investments in order to prevent the disasters, you always have to fight your way against the resources that are required for regular development projects, which is water supply, sewerage, road networks and all that. And there are always these limited resources available, and you have to kind of work your way to have disaster risk investments included into this. Now, in Pune, actually, this started with incidences of floods, which actually turned into some accidents a few years ago, which really built up the public opinion to have stormwater drainage and flood assessments done. And therefore, this project was launched. And of course, the objective is here, which is basically trying to adapt to the increasing flooding that was there in the city of Pune. Looking at the increasing incidences, and we all know that the incidences of flooding in the urban areas has been increasing in the last few years. I think we have a very good example here. Both these are images from Google Earth. One is from year 2002 and one is from year 2006. And this here is a natural stream which drains into the river up north there. And you can see the development around this in year 2002, and 6 years down the line, it's already kind of filling up. And if you look at the image now, I think it will be still filled up a lot more. So what actually happens is, as the paved areas increase in the city, your runoff increases almost 2 or 3 times. Coupled with the fact that a lot of natural drains get constricted due to pressure on the land, and then you have floods. So basically, urbanization is one of the very important factors of causing of floods in the urban areas in recent years. And of course, climate change. We have been seeing that there is more rainfall happening in lesser number of days. Intensities are increasing. For analyzing the Pune data for last about 40 years, what we find is that prior to 2000, most of the rainfall actually happened in small amounts. Almost 85% or more of rainfall was in small amounts, which was 40 mm or less in a day, whereas this has dropped after the year 2000, indicating that there's been higher intensities of rainfall. So climate change and urbanization, I think, are the major factors. I've got some pictures of the flood situations. They, I think, apart from the fact that they are a health hazard and risk to lives, it also causes much more higher investments in roads, because road damage is a major factor due to floods. You see here missing infrastructure, no culverts, no bridges, causing flooding almost every year. Then you have inadequate section of natural drains, which constricts the flow of the streams, and you have flood and very high risk of flood damage in this residential area here. You got some industrial area also being affected by floods. So this is a kind of a scenario which is common all across the city. The steps that were involved in this, actually it was quite an integrated plan, starting from preparing a base map using satellite imagery, going down to prediction of rainfall intensity and detailed topographic surveys. Almost 1,000 kilometers of roads and drains were surveyed. A lot of citizen interactions to identify flooding areas. Designing engineering solutions, trying to source funds, and then implement this project as well. I'll just quickly go through some of the methodologies that we adopted. We used 2003 1-meter resolution satellite imagery to prepare a base map, out of which watersheds were defined. So Pune is a city which has, apart from administrative wards and zones, it also now has sub-watersheds, which are basically areas that drain into the river, and all the planning has been done around this. And it is also being now used for sewage treatment and sewage laying works for the city. So each basin looks more or less like this. You have a river, and you have the natural drainage system as well as the road network, which actually drains that whole area. The entire project, it covered about 300 square kilometers. We had identified about 15,000 nodes in the city. So what we have on the GIS platform now is flood data on about 15,000 locations within the city, which is accessible to everybody. It's on the website as well. And then about 1,000 kilometers of roads were designed. Cross drainage works were one of the major bottlenecks. Almost 350 had to be rebuilt. So this project consists of such a lot of structural and infrastructural modifications. Okay. What we found, there were some interesting observations. Out of 362 kilometers of natural drains, we find that almost 50 kilometers are partially obstructed due to development and due to pressure on land. 15 kilometers are completely disappeared. 350 culverts, as I mentioned, have to be rebuilt, and most of the roads actually did not have any drains, which have to be now provided. Another example of how the area is sort of being industrialized and drains are kept under pressure, which increases the flood risks. The total project cost, it was a huge cost compared to the regular budget of the city, 267 million to implement all these improvements. So what we actually did was to phase the project, identify the worst hit areas, and then identify the basins on which work needs to be done. There was a lot of struggle with the municipal administration to make sure that this money is made available, but there was at the same time a lot of pressure from the public to address the regular flooding that was happening. So funding from national government was sought, and about 70% of the funding came from state and the central government, and the corporation itself put about 30%, and this was met. It is currently being executed, this project, and this is just for phase 1, let me remind you. Okay, the data is already being used now. I think the best part was building permissions are now linked with analysis of this data. So which is quite important. Just the last slide. If this kind of stormwater drainage has to be done for almost every city, and these are some of 3 or 4 questions I think which are for the technology organizations to look at regarding high resolution urban imagery, and then sat imagery for land use and identifying the flooding areas as well. So that's it from me. Thank you.
So there is one, thank you very much, Ajit. There is a question from Twitter, which I would just request some of the panelists or the new presenters to respond to, and then we have about 7 or 8 minutes for the final closing discussion. So can any of you speak to your use of spatial data for infrastructure in risk assessment, especially technology choices with respect to the open source? So basically the question, I think maybe Sushil or Inder or then Eric or Ajit, if you want to respond on this particular question which has come up from Twitter on our session. Do you use any of the spatial data for infrastructure planning in assessing the risk to the infrastructure? And was the choice of technology open source or?
Yeah, at least for the Pune project, we did use satellite imagery, which was 2003 Iconus image of 1 meter resolution. We also did use Google Earth quite a lot, especially after now that they have historical images. For every place now they have about 4 or 5 images dating back to 5 or 6 years. Yes, so that's one of the things that that has been very useful for comparing.
Yeah, for the regional risk assessments, again, as I presented in the previous session, the resolution is a function of the imagery that is needed. So at a country level, you would not use high resolution imagery, but in the city level, especially when you get to the level of the probabilistic risk models, one of the impacts is measured on lifeline. So what is going to happen to the water, the electric supply and everything. So you need high resolution imagery. You also need maps of the utility networks themselves, overlay them on the satellite imagery, which is usually not available in the developing world. So satellite imagery is definitely needed. We would use best available satellite imagery. In terms of cost functions and the kind of scales we are talking about, we might use archived imagery rather than fresh imagery. So maybe 6 months back. Overlay the lifelines, and then the hazard layer would be also looking at the impact on that. So which railway lines will be down, which bridges will be down, power plants, dams, electric supply, water supply, all of that damage, you need the high resolution imagery for that.
Okay. Eric, you want to respond on that?
Just very briefly, from the bank's perspective, I'm aware that a recent analysis of the city of Dakar in Senegal was done using remote sensing imagery from, I believe it was Landsat, if I'm not mistaken. However, also from our Latin American region colleagues who work on the CAPRA initiative, it is also my understanding that it is fully based on open source technologies. There was a session on that earlier today, and our LAC colleagues could certainly provide more information. Thanks.
Before we come to close the session, are there any issues or questions that, yes please, speak in the mic.
Okay, very general question for the professor. First, in my opinion, coordinating institution is a very difficult thing. You show a very big infrastructure or structure of coordination at the political level. How do you see the compromise of the authorities? They are really participating of the meetings, or they are sending someone who represents them? Is this permanent or not? That's the main question. How do you see it? And if the answer is positive, what's the formula?
Yes, it is a positive case so far. Until now, still we were in a stage of developing the whole concept, networking, and activating all parts of that scheme that you saw. And it is very important that the government is directly involved, for instance, with the steering committee, Minister of Interior, not as a Minister of Interior, but as a minister appointed by government. She is chairing the steering committee, and all ministers are supposed to be there. And if some of the ministers is not present at the beginning, it was a couple of times, and after strong notification by the Prime Minister that if they are absent, they're supposed to have a very strong reason why they're absent. After that, things start running in a regular manner. But it is true. All the time you're supposed to be behind and to push things ahead until things start going according to their own dynamics. So far, again, it is a positive case. We start networking process in December 2007, and the networking process was accomplished in April 2009, almost a year and a half.
Could you just speak in the
My question is also related to this national platform. Who are the members of the working group which you circulated in your presentations? They are representatives of national governmental bodies, or it's mixed group?
If we are talking about the working groups under the auspices of the State Secretaries Council,
yes,
that
yes.
is led by the Secretary General of the government, depending what ministry is in charge for each of the working groups, the State Secretary of that ministry is a person in charge for coordination, and the other representatives from the other ministries and agencies inside each of the working group depends what are their responsibilities, but definitely they're supposed to be high officials, so not political level but administrative level, not lower that so-called councillor. It is one level low than the state secretary. We have that kind of ranks. So they're supposed to be on a very high rank. Why? Because they need to have authority to make decisions and to move things ahead. That's the way how things are organized.
And this instrument is financed by the budget?
Yes,
or,
yes,
yeah?
yes, yes. That's a part of the government.
Madam Olushula also wanted to have a response on this.
Actually, I just want to respond to your question to the professor. Actually, in Africa, if you see that I presented about 25 countries have established national platform. It ranges. If there's a good political will, at times you can even form the national platform within 1.5 years. But if depending on how fast each country goes, as you know, it's not easy to work with, to bring technicians and politicians together. Thank you.
Gordon from Kenya.
Okay. One very quick one to the professor, and secondly to Ajit. Professor, the challenge of the transfers and turnovers in the national platforms, how are you addressing that? To Ajit, you talked of this water management system in Pune. Is there an integrated program to address the most vulnerable people within the city, especially the informal settlement? Thank you.
May I ask you just to make a point with the first part of your question? It is the challenge about
the changing personnel. You see the
okay.
Transfer of resources or.
Okay. Well, it is important in each country to have a continuity. Governments are changing, but the functions are remaining. And the one government changing the another, it's important to continue at least to have a better option What the better option in political terms does it mean? You could guess. But from the other side, when we're talking about funds, about coordination, because here, as you mentioned, everything is about coordination and reasonable use of available resources. That was the idea why we established that administrative level of coordination under the auspices of the State Secretaries Council. Why? For instance, we made a review of 98 different laws. It appeared that 93 out of them were in collision to each other. Very strong reason why we are establishing that working group. Or for instance, money never enough. And you're going to find a piece of, a chunk of money on different sub-budgets in different ministries or agencies. And if there are no coordination, that money are worth for nothing. But if there are coordination, you could make a real move ahead with the money. Communication technology, GPS or computers or networking, etc., etc. It is very silly to buy each ministry or agency to purchase their own document management system or this or that pieces of technology. Instead, government or the whole system to purchase one central unit and users facility for all others. So that's the way how, in a very rational way, to put things from the legal, from the financial, from the human resource perspective, from any other perspective. It is not easy. There are resistance. But there are different ways how to break resistance with a good word, with a pressure, and you're going to make your estimate what works for that period of, for that particular point. Thank you.
Thank you. Ajit.
Just answering to your question, we did actually prioritize the areas which were worst hit in terms of the flooding was concerned. And these normally tend to be areas where the slums are located near the low-lying areas near the streams. But the project actually addressed the entire basin in which these low-lying areas were there, because unless you address the whole network of drainage, you'll not be able to solve the flooding problem completely. So in terms of identifying the basins, we went by the worst hit areas and then we addressed the entire basin issues there. So that's how the approach was.
I think
yes.
we come to the end of the session. So we can, you need to...
No, I was just going to actually refer the question to you because, in fact, Praveen was the municipal commissioner when this project was there. He's asking about housing programs for the poor, which was also a part of the...
You wanted to make one last?
Yeah, just one word more about your question that is extremely important, and your one about the coordination. Yes, it was a lot of forth and back until we finally agreed that the position of national coordinator formally will be established, and it was established 1 month ago. And I'm the first national coordinator with a very wide range of authorities in that terms. But until we reached the point, national coordinator position to be established, it was like a nightmare. And you could imagine that's a politics about.
And the politics has succeeded because the ambassador of Macedonia himself came here to attend his session, and he went off after he stopped speaking. So it shows that it was important to make you there. Can we overshoot the time for a few minutes now? Yeah, okay.
I'm Roberto Lira from Chile. Something I feel missing here, this is a planning session, is we're talking about risk, which is before the event. And we haven't talked anything about post-disaster. And I think it is very important to have some planning for that stage. You know, it's been 3 months since the big earthquake in Chile, and there are still things that are not being managed in a country which has many plans at many levels. So I think it's very important to have plans for the first day, for the first 3 days, for the week, etc. And now we're facing with the opportunity that the disaster gives us, because we can plan whole new neighborhoods, for example, even whole new cities. And it is important to have plans and discuss that part.
No, I think that's very important because post-disaster takes everybody's attention. So this is a deliberate attempt to look at pre-disaster. But anyway, I ask Mr. Anil Prasad if he wants to make a quick response on this.
In fact, I mean, your point is very valid. And in Indian context, what happened in Gujarat in 2001, Bhuj, it was a very severe earthquake. So that was an opportunity to the government. And in fact, the entire town of Anjar was that place which was totally razed to ground. That was rebuilt. So that was an opportunity to give a shape to the urban planning there. And same with some parts of Kashmir also, where a large number of houses were damaged in earthquake of 2005. They laid out the entire villages in a new way, and they made good use of this catastrophe.
There is the response from Mr. Akhil Beg.
Yeah, I forgot to introduce myself, Timur Fakalbek from Kyrgyzstan. And it is very nice to see that so top-level politicians engaged in disaster management here. And I want to ask you ideas, and because in Kyrgyzstan, maybe as in other countries, national agencies maybe not so interested in disaster risk assessment. Maybe they worry that they will get more responsibility and more work to do. Because when I visited, for example, with national agencies, I asked, let's do, for example, risk assessment for schools and the hospitals. It is very big problem now. They say, okay, we are doing it, and the special national institutes, research design institute, does it, and I think maximum 100 schools they do the assess for the seismic resistance and other things. But we have more than 2,000 schools, so it will take 20 years. But they say it is going on, it is okay. So, and one question: who and how can push these national ministries, agencies to accelerate the disaster risk assessment? Communities, NGOs, or international donors? Who can push, and force them? Your ideas, because we already know you have done it, and for example, national agencies. Who can use it?
I think I'm going to ask Madam Olushula to respond on this.
Okay, thank you. Actually, it's not a matter of force. It's a matter of each country having, for example, I'm giving, for example, from the African Union Commission perspective, because the heads of state have made a declaration. In our own case, we have the heads of state who have made this declaration, and each country implement the decisions and the declaration of the heads of state. Take, for example, the decision on the one for the disaster risk reduction we are talking about now. Each of the member states is supposed to implement it, and then we, as a commission, we now go around to coordinate. So in your own case, that is why the issue of regional cooperation is very important, that you can have a regional cooperation, and then you have a commission who will monitor and will coordinate and facilitate the implementation of decisions on disaster risk reduction. Thank you.
So, it has to grow out of the political will of the nation. Yes. I'm saying it has to grow out of the political will of the nation. I mean, you can't have it by force from any external agency. It has to come out of the political will of the nation itself.
For instance, in the process of networking that I mentioned, December 2007, April 2009, all municipalities, all mayors signed the first memorandum, and after that the agreement, the contract, how they will proceed this, because we put that until to the lowest level, to the neighborhood level. Also, all ministers, directors of the governmental agencies 77 research institutes, 173 labs, referent labs of different capacity. Even it is curiosity. It was that 5 religious leaders of 5 religious denominations were on one table signing the document supporting this effort with establishment of the national platform. Christian, Orthodox, Catholic, Protestant, Jewish community, and Islamic community. They all signed the document supporting. It means something. It means something. Not to mention how many NGOs, 8 chancellors of 8 universities. So it is like a national endeavor. But until this level of formal presentation of will, now the problems will start. Because one is to sign the document, and a completely different story is when you start pushing things to happen, to reorganize, to train, to coordinate. And now I do expect some problems, but once again, I lean to the goodwill and to the reaction of most of the stakeholders that we approach in these 2 years. The reaction was, oh, this is supposed to be done much earlier.
Okay, so let me now call to a close this session first. Thank you to all the panelists for having made excellent presentations, having brought experiences from their countries. I think we went through a big discourse, and it's sometimes difficult to draw out what do we really want to take back from this session. The real issue that we put out on the table was that if risk is well known, and we saw that regional risk assessments, national risk assessments show what are the probabilities of losses which countries will suffer, then why aren't countries taking enough steps to mitigate them upfront, like they take steps to increase the infrastructure? And we saw some of the underlying causes where it can happen as against where it doesn't happen. One is institutional strengthening. The national platform from Macedonia, the National Disaster Management Authority of India, the African Union program, some of these examples which create institutional basis to convert the political understanding of disasters into actual action. So this is one thing that we could take back. And the second is the role and leadership of elected leadership, which we saw from the city level. It's okay to have, as Eric was saying, a very well-informed assessment and tools for city level planning. But how does it really finally translate into actual actions which make the drainage or the roads or the slums disaster proof and plan it? So again, elected leaders and their motivation and convincing them is really what translates this into actual action. So with this, I'd like to call to an end this session, and hope that all of us have learned a lot of new directions for taking our understanding of risk assessment into concrete actions back in our own countries. Thank you.